I don't know what referee decision is going to go against United in September of this upcoming season, but I'm looking forward to hearing about it all season long. This is the ArsenalVision Post-Match Podcast. My name is Elliot, the Block Man on Twitter. Yankee Gunner, that's right. Eric Ten Hag in. Look, we have gotten into a deeply cynical place in football. Deeply, deeply cynical. To the point now where clubs think it is acceptable to considering sacking a manager for simply finishing with the worst record in the club's history in league competition, and for finishing 95th out of 96 eligible top 5 league clubs in shots faced for a season. They think things like losing to your rival 7-0 is a reason to sack a manager. Losing to Crystal Palace 4-0 in front of the world is a reason to sack a manager. Finishing 8th, crashing out of a straightforward Champions League group. They think all of these things are reasons to sack a manager, and I am glad that we do not live in such a cynical world. Erik ten Hag is staying at Manchester United, and I, for one, am a huge Erik ten Hag supporter. I will let you know that Phil Costa and I did a video and audio episode dedicated to the brilliant decision by Manchester United to keep Erik ten Hag over on Patreon, so you can check that out. Also over on Patreon, Tim did, I just think, well, let me explain what he did, and then I can get back to you. So Tim has been doing a history series, essentially, over on Patreon. We've created a collection of them so you can find them all. He's going to be running through Arsenal history. But he did a bit on the Herbert Chapman era, having done the post-war era just prior to that. And we're going to collect all these so you'll have them, but they are a phenomenal way to really get to know your club. Now, many of you listening, may know about these periods already and maybe students of the history of the club. But for those of you who aren't, it is a phenomenal way to just go for a walk and get educated about the history of the club, something that I am certainly enjoying doing. So that's all out there right now. Later, throughout the week and the upcoming weeks with the Euros kicking off, you'll be able to hear the Euro Daily, some on this feed, but a lot on the Football Vision feed with Phil Costa. I'll do a few of those episodes, but he's going to get, it says here, qualified people to do most of those episodes. So I really hope you'll sign up for the Football Vision pod and check out the Euro Daily. It's something to keep you going every single day during the Euros. I must admit, we are recording this on Wednesday. So if you're listening to this on Thursday or Friday or another day that ends in Y that isn't this day, if news has broken, the reason we're not covering it is it hadn't broken yet. Okay. And so we can't fix it. And that's how it works. Love you for being here. Thank you for being here. Hope you're enjoying, I guess, still spring. Your spring. Summer hasn't started yet, which means we can't officially panic about transfers yet. But we will. We're going to talk about Benjamin Sesko snubbing the Arsenal. We're going to talk about Chido Obi Martin snubbing the Arsenal. There's a lot of snubbings of the Arsenal going on right now. And we'll talk about all the snubbings going on with Tim. You can find him on Twitter @Stillmanator. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Do you feel snubbed?
No, but I'm in London and spring hasn't even started here yet. I've got the heating is on. I'm drinking a cup of tea and it's the 12th of June. And it kind of, if you told me it was the 12th of February, I'd believe you. Put it that way.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. We have 2 seasons here, an icy hellscape and a burning mosquito-filled hellscape. Those are the only 2 seasons in Minnesota. So it is either 20 below zero or, I guess in Celsius terms, like 30 plus and mosquito ridden. So we're currently in the latter of those 2 stages. Also here to be snubbed is Paul. You can find him on Twitter, Pause My Pants. Hello, Pause.
Woohoo! How's my volume?
Your volume is good. How's your snubbing? Do you feel snubbed?
No, not till you said it. I am a bit concerned about our American listeners, though, because just so they don't get confused, we have a history thing on Herbert Chapman.
Herbert Chapman, yeah. Not Herbert Chapman. Herbert. Well, okay.
Don't you Americans call it herbs and spices?
We call the food herbs, but we call the person Herb.
Well, that's very strange. Why did you decide to not call it herbs?
Because, as you know, we have a deep love for all things French in our society. We walk around trying to be French as much as possible in America when we're eating our freedom fries.
Do you contract herpes?
I mean, me personally,
well, you might.
Me personally, or the average person. Tim, please.
Can I just point out that this Herbert that I was talking about from the 1920s did actually kind of think that prosperity was just around the corner because he asked for 5 years to build a winning team. But this Herbert from the 1920s delivered on that promise.
Unlike another man whose last name starts with an H, and he's at another club that wears red. Okay, 5 phases. We're in the snubbing phase. We're going to talk about being snubbed. So there's a couple of topics to get to today, and candidly, it's not the busiest time of news for Arsenal. So I think please take with a grain of salt that we are covering what's out there to be covered. I do think that the academy is an interesting place to start. Tim, any big club that has aspirations to stay successful long-term needs to find a balance between using the market effectively, but also bringing talent through their academy effectively. I think that is an important part of it. If we think back to Raul Sanyehi, I think one of the real legends of the club, a real thought leader, when he did that whole diagram where everything went around in sort of a square and none of it made a lot of sense. One of the things that he did sort of point out was the importance of the academy being one of the pillars of the first team. And I do think that there's truth to that. Maybe the only true and helpful thing that man ever said or added to the club. But there's an interesting discourse developing about whether we're utilizing our academy effectively. I mean, obviously there's an academy player starring in the first team and starring for England, and Bukayo Saka, one of the great, and I say this, I don't think with any hyperbole, even at this point, one of the great products of the Arsenal Academy ever, really, if you think about it. I think it's also worth remembering how rare it is for academy players to break through to become stars in the first team, but maybe not so rare for them to break through to be performers in the first team. Now, we do have some of those in Nelson, who's played some minutes, and Nketiah, who's played some minutes. Smith Rowe probably would have contributed more were it not for injuries. But behind that class, we haven't really found a way to bring a group through. We know that Amari Hutchinson left for Chelsea, and there's some reporting that Chido Obi Martin, who is the impossible to miss, can't stop scoring striker in the, U17s or whatever. I mean, he's 16 years old, I believe, but he's 6'2", so impossible to miss is right. Some news that he might be off to Germany. Now, before I turn this over to you, I will point out what a lot of people pointed out to me, which is in Germany, you can get a professional contract a year earlier than you can get one in England. And this is very important because ultimately, if I'm a 16-year-old and someone's saying, hey, come make £500,000 a year with us, or spend another year not doing that and hope you don't do your ACL, or maybe go up a level and find that you can't reach the level, or maybe something happens that's unexpected and you've thrown away an amount of money that most people need to work literally a decade to earn. At 16 years old, who am I to tell someone not to do that? And who knows what the family influence is saying too. But so with the rumors of him potentially being off, with Amari having left, with not many minutes at all going to academy players this last season, where are you right now in your overview of the academy and the use of the academy by the current regime?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I think there are like 2 tiers of your kind of academy players. There's your what Nketiah and Nelson have been for us, and Joe Willock was before that, and maybe not technically an academy player, but Emi Martinez, like your kind of squad fodder, right? And you can use those players to kind of take up those squad roles so that you don't pay like 17 million for Lucas Perez or however much money for El Neni, when you can give those like 300-400 minutes a season to someone else. They can boost value, you can check them out, and then it might come to like a Joe Willock kind of, thanks, you did a good job for us, maybe let's go our separate ways and we'll make a lot of money and you'll go off and have a good career, which he is. He's doing well at Newcastle. That's that brilliant arrangement. That's worked for everyone. He did a job for us for a while, probably came to a stage where we knew he wasn't going to be a first 11 player. He knew it as well, so he moved on. That's your like, people refer to Manchester United's class of 92 as the golden generation, but there's like a silver generation thing that I kind of think your academy, that should almost be the primary focus of your academy. Like trying to build a policy around producing a Bukayo Saka, you don't do that because, to your point, maybe once a decade, Cole, Wilshere, Saka, but particularly when you're dealing with such small numbers, even like Cole and Wilshere didn't work out in the end for different reasons unrelated to their talent levels. So you can't build a policy around bottling lightning and having your 1 in 1,000 player. That's just not going to happen. That's if you do that once, that is amazing, because to buy Bukayo Saka now will cost you so much money. So getting him not quite for free because you put in a lot of time and resource. It's kind of invisible cost, but to get him essentially for free in football terms, amazing. That pays for your academy many times over, as does the 30 million for Joe Willock. But when it comes to guys, of Obi Martin's age, you cannot build a pathway for someone that age, and unless it's like Fabregas level. It's the same. You spoke to Jacob about Nwaneri. Like, even for him, I think with like really, potentially super talented academy players, I don't think you move people out the way for them. I think you essentially say, if you're that good, you will move someone out of the way. We are not going, this is a mistake Arsene Wenger made as well. We are not going to hold positions on reserve for you on the basis that we think maybe when you're 19 you'll be amazing. If you're amazing, whoever is in your way will move out of the way, right? Pepe, I know Pepe was a flop as a signing. Saka moved him out of the way, right? Without Saka, we might have persevered with Pepe a bit longer. We didn't, because Saka moved him out of the way. £72 million winger. Sorry, I'm having your spot and you're gone. Fabregas did the same thing. Wilshere came into the first team. Like, if you think you've got super talent who can be a starting 11 player as a teenager, they will move someone out of the way. So I don't think you make plans for that player. For someone like Obi Martin, who's so young, you can't. Like, how do you do that? He's not going to be ready now. So what, do you just carry a space in your squad for 2 years and wait for him? No, you can't do that, basically. So yeah, maybe I think there's just so much noise and hit and miss with academies about, one crop comes through and you get a couple of good players, another crop comes through and you don't really, we've not had that many in recent years, but also we're a much better team, which makes us a harder team to get into, but also we're still quite young. We're not teenager young, but other than maybe that Partey Jorginho spot, there's no one there that we have to make a contingency plan for. We don't have like a 32 or 33-year-old who's like, if we had like a good 32-year-old centre forward, you'd say, okay, let's stick with them and let's bring up Obi Martin in the background. What you can't and must not do is say, we're going to carry that squad space for a year or two, have no one in it, take that risk just in case he becomes good again. So honestly, I think when you're high functioning as an organisation, which I think Arsenal are at this stage, I think it's pretty safe to say that, I think it just becomes even harder, and that's fine. Like, the bar goes up. In the Invincibles era, we had Jermaine Pennant, David Bentley, who were hugely highly rated, Jeremy Aliadier, all really, really highly rated, but they didn't make it because there was no room for them, because we had the players that we had, and that's just the way it goes. And ultimately, we didn't really regret losing any of those players, and the level would have come down. So I think we've got to be realistic, and there's an overlap with the sales conversation. We are close to a 90-point team, and we're trying to be a 95-point team. That just doesn't leave a lot of room around the edges, I'm afraid.
I think that's all very well said and all right. And I think one of the things that I want to highlight is how little we really know or are able to predict about who will be the star, because so much changes in a footballer between the ages of 16 and 18 and in that range. I mean, you get the rare Cesc Fabregas, but I mean, that's once in a lifetime, really. Even Bukayo Saka, I was going back and reading articles from when he was a 17-year-old, season review articles from 2018-19 in the academy. And there were 4 or 5 players listed as like more likely to break through than him. And I mean, Fuller and Balogun was an obvious one, but it's guys like Tyrese John-Jules and Matt Smith, right? And Joe Willock, who, I guess, did break through. So I'm not saying that's an inaccurate prediction, and not all of them were the same age. But even going back before that, when he was 16, he wasn't even listed as a U18 prospect. So it's not to say that people didn't know about Saka. I don't want to pretend I'm that close a watcher, but if you go back and look at the articles, there's a lot of unpredictability about who comes through.
But even Sorry, I was just going to say, even when Fabregas came through, Elliot, Vieira was 29, Gilberto was knocking around that age, Edu was leaving. Like, space did clear as well, and there wasn't. Don't get me wrong, like Fabregas was Fabregas and was amazing, but there was like contingency was in the air at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Jack Wilshere had a similar path, right? So it does depend on that to some extent. And you look at Saka coming in at left back. I think some credit has to be given to Unai Emery actually in some respect, right? Of, hey, we're going to find a place for a player that's really talented, even though he wasn't maybe the most ballyhooed of players. But whether you want to look at the Kieran Gibbses of the world, the Alex Iwobis of the world, the Joe Willocks of the world, they're not all in the same category in terms of what they achieve for the club. But those are really good careers from academy players. What you're hoping to produce is some money for your academy players. And we can come on to what we've done with Nketiah and Nelson and maybe not getting the value out of players like Ainsley Maitland-Niles. You're hoping to create some money out of academy players and or the very rare example of a star first-team player, a Bukayo Saka. And you have to accept that not every generation of academy players will even have one of those, let alone a few of those. We thought we had obviously two in Smith Rowe and Saka. We tried to make it more than that with Nketiah and Nelson. We persisted, and some would say persisted too long. So, Paul, it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Because if you persist too long, it's why are Nketiah and Smith Rowe and Nelson still knocking around? And if you don't persist long enough, it's like, what's broken with our academy that we're not giving them chances? I see it as a squad management point. To Tim's comment, though, if Nelson and Nketiah and Smith Rowe had been sold last summer, you probably have to dip into the market to do something about that. But to some extent, from January to April, those three collectively had almost no minutes. Very, very little minutes, and certainly not impactful ones. Even 50 of those minutes going to a Nwaneri makes a difference, right? The dead rubber in the last Champions League group game going to Miles Lewis-Skelly, right, can make a difference. So I think what happens when you have too many players at the fringes of your squad that aren't trusted, if you're in Mikel Arteta and you keep Eddie and you keep Nelson and you keep Smith Rowe and you keep Fabio Vieira, whatever the case is, you can't look at them when there's some minutes available and go, I'm bypassing you and going straight to Miles Lewis-Skelly. I'm bypassing you and going straight to Nwaneri. You got to play them, especially with the wages you've given them. Otherwise, it just looks like you're destroying their asset value. How are you ever going to sell them? So by keeping those players, you make it harder to find those few minutes here and few minutes there that can actually be a massive lifeline for an academy player trying to show they can be at the level. So it's not just about how you work the academy. It's about how you, to Tim's point, create squad opportunities where those rare minutes, especially for a team trying to compete for titles in Champions Leagues, those rare minutes can give you a chance to blood an academy player, to debut an academy player and give them that first team experience. Do you think that's really it? It's the fine alchemy of squad construction, as Tim has been saying?
Yeah, I'd sign up to everything Tim said.
Less about what I said.
I liked the way you reframed what Tim said. That was good too. I did like it.
It's what I do.
I think the other context is the rate of change of our club at the moment in terms of the Eddie conversation 2 years ago, both in terms of where we were at, where our squad was at, where we were at in the league, where we'd just been. I mean, if you're Edu and Per trying to put together a plan for these guys and you're the club 2 years ago and its opportunities then, the players and where they were at that particular point, our requirements have shifted dramatically. And now we're in a situation, even comparing last year to this year, right now, hopefully, if you're Edu, you're thinking, well, we're going to go again. We're going to be at that level. We're going to be pushing second, first in the league. Now we need to go deeper in the cups. We're going to learn better about rotation. So it's a very dynamic environment for those guys. So if you take this as a snapshot of this is just how it is with the club and with the academy, well, it's not, right? It's changed significantly where we're at in terms of our squad usage, our expectations. The gaps have gotten smaller. Our requirements for these guys to have an impact have gotten narrower. But now we need to think about how we use the cups a little bit more. So it's very challenging for these guys. The fees you pay the wages you pay your Eddies and your Nelsons like that. We talked about on Monday about the difficulties of selling, and maybe these guys, maybe we're still giving too much money. We're giving more like Arsene Wenger money to these players to keep them around forever. When in fact, if we were a little smarter with our wage policy, and because we saw different timing of exits, and like you take an Eddie scenario where you're not going to keep him until he's 28. You want to make sure you have optionality when he's 21, 22, 23, where you have him on a wage that you can shift him, not on a wage that you can keep him forever. So there's a lot of moving parts. I've sympathy for the club in many aspects, in that they're evolving what we did with our academy players. They're evolving, one hopes, the wage policy. And there's also different dynamics in the academy. Like the Chido Obi story is a little different to the Eddie story, in that, forgetting the abilities of the player, one guy showed up when he was like, well, we got Eddie from Chelsea, but we got him pretty young, 13, I think. You take somebody like Willock, we got him when he was like, I don't know what it was, Tim will correct me, but like 5, 6. We got the Willock brothers, right? There were 3 of them, I think, knocking around. Very different stories. If you go out and you find a kestrel, a baby kestrel that's fallen out of a tree, and it's in your garden, and it's got a little broken leg, right?
Here we go.
Yeah. Or a broken wing, because they need those a lot. And you hand raise him, and you feed him every day. You and raise him up and build him into a strong little kestrel, and the bugger flies off on you. You're going to be pissed. But like, if you found him 2 days ago, which is a bit more the Chido Obi story, right?
Yeah, he came over at 14 from Denmark. Yep.
Yeah, so he's from Denmark. Nothing wrong with that. We love people from Denmark. We want more people from Denmark. But what he's not is, well, anyway, he's not part of the water, right?
No, so I get it. He's not a North London boy who was brought up from 8 years old to wear the cannon on his chest, and it's harder to convince them.
Yeah, so it doesn't feel like this great, not that it should be, it's not a great, it's not that surprising, right? Somebody from Denmark decides, maybe the Bundesliga 2 years after he showed up, whereas that little kestrel that you hand raised with a little broken ring and the bugger flies off, he's a bastard.
Right. Okay. You know what I mean? That was all really good and made a lot of sense. Started strong, maybe didn't end quite as strong, but it's a good contribution nonetheless. 2 really important points that I think we need to make here. One is understanding how fickle we, the fans, are, because it goes from Eddie Nketiah is too good to be playing U23 reserve football. He needs to be in the first team. He's dominated every level. When's he going to get his pathway? It goes from that to Eddie Nketiah stinks. He's not good enough. We need to get rid of him. And like, you can blink an eye and you've gone through that period. So the shouts for Miles Lewis-Skelly to get playing time and the shouts for Nwaneri to get playing time will be shouts for them to be binned for someone better after 5 performances that aren't good or a result that doesn't go our way. And so the club have to be careful, not just about finding opportunities to play them so they don't lose them, but also finding the opportunities to develop them the right way and find the right time to move on if it isn't working. I think we've stuck too long with Nelson, Smith Rowe, and Nketiah. But you can forgive a club for wanting to find the way to make academy players fit in. And just from an economic standpoint, it's pure profit when you do sell them. So maybe you can be a little bit more patient in terms of trying to let them arrive. I want to make another point though, Tim, and I think this is the last thing I want to say sort of on the academy front. It's changed in terms of what people know. You can go on Y-Scout and watch 16-year-olds play football now. I mean, you can literally go on a scouting platform and watch a Chelsea Academy kid play that no one's ever heard of. 15 years ago, if you were another club and you were thinking about plucking an academy player, you really didn't have anything to go on other than rumors and what people were saying about him and chatter. Now you can actually scout youth players. The market efficiencies are going away, and the last great market efficiency might be academies, and top clubs are starting to spot that and starting to poach academy players in the way they used to poach the sort of young talent from clubs, first-team talent. So that increase in information, I mean, think about this. Chido Obi Martin scores 4 goals in a game or whatever, and that video has 5 million views on a social media platform. It's a 16-year-old with 5 million views, there's no secrets anymore. So the idea that you're going to develop these players in secrecy and then launch them into the first team, well, Germany figured out they've got an efficiency. We can give a professional contract a year earlier. So let's go poach these potential superstars when we can go offer them money and their club can't. So, Tim, do you think there's some of that too? Just that as this market continues to evolve and as the technology expands and as the knowledge continues to grow, the academy becomes the next frontier on which market inefficiencies will be exploited. And it seems that Germany maybe is recognizing that in terms of what they can do with some of this English talent, or I mean, not English, but England
Talent
club
from
academy
England.
talent.
Yeah. I'm glad you used German inefficiency in the same sentence. I'm not sure
They're known
anyone's
for their
done that
efficiency.
before. Yeah, absolutely, and also that there is a clear, well, I say a clear pathway's developed. There are role models for that pathway now. Jude Bellingham, winning Champions Leagues at Real Madrid, having kind of eschewed a lot of English academy places and going to Borussia Dortmund and somewhere like that. And because that's the other thing, that's the other side to this, is that German clubs have not just spotted that efficiency, as it were, but they're probably quite willing and understand that they will lose those players, but if they're good, they'll lose them at a very, very tidy profit. So it's an even bigger efficiency. Not only are you getting access to the talent, but if it really pops, you get to sell it for loads and loads of money as well. And, Premier League wages and, players wanting to go back to England to play will always come into that, albeit Jude Bellingham's taken a different path. So, and, Jadon Sancho as well. If you do well at Borussia Dortmund, you too might get ignored by Erik ten Hag and fall out with him. And that's a career opportunity not to be missed, to lose your place to Anthony. And so, there's and lots of players are realising this, and we've got a couple of them, right? Emil Smith-Rowe, it's easy to forget. He went to Germany a couple of years ago because he was injured the whole time, but he did. Reiss Nelson went to Germany for a season. So a lot of these players are kind of figuring out that Germany is actually quite a good place to go in your late teens, early 20s to kind of really develop and then come back. And also, I think the Bundesliga is, close enough to the Premier League that it's not a cultural shock either way. If you go from England to Germany, I don't think you need that much time to settle in. We've got plenty of coaches in the Premier League that are either German or have been very, very influenced by kind of German style. And likewise in the other direction, if you've been playing in the Bundesliga for a couple of years, you can slip back into the Premier League no problem stylistically. So it seems to be a pretty virtuous marriage. To be honest, in most directions. And I think a lot of Premier League clubs, this may change in the spending regulations era, but to this point, a lot of Premier League clubs have been so rich that, someone like United will go, we won't spend the time developing Sancho for 3 or 4 years. We'll pick him up for like 80 million when he actually gets good. Like a lot of Premier League clubs have been rich enough to do that anyway. Again, whether that starts to change in an era of spending regulations, whether clubs decide that they need to take a much tighter leash on academy players and how that shakes out, I don't know. But then again, we've also got this bizarre situation where selling academy players shows up as pure book profit. And actually lots of teams are more inclined to sell their academy players for that reason. So there's loads and loads of dynamics that go into this. But the headline is definitely the Germans have been efficient here.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things to consider, by the way, like in terms of what we're currently doing with our academy. I mean, first of all, am I crazy or are we using the loans, the loan market less? Just I think we've moved to a system where we don't loan players out. Maybe Mikel has said, hey, I want our players educated in our way of playing, in our system.
That's what City have been doing under Guardiola. City have not been loaning players that they think have a chance.
Yeah, it does, though, maybe make it harder for player value to be maintained or for player patience. If you're playing on TV at a club of some stature, in a reasonable league at 17, maybe you feel the club has more of a plan for you, even though it might have been better for your development to stay at Arsenal and play in the youth team. So there's that. some of the loans have not gone well. Like obviously Nketiah's loan spell was a disaster. So I do think that we've maybe learned a lesson that loans take the control out of your hands of the development of the player. If that coach decides he's not in the plan anymore, now suddenly he's training with a coach that you may not trust their training methods and he may not get playing time. And all of a sudden it's just a complete waste of time. So the loan market is certainly an issue. I do want to pivot a little bit, Paul, staying on the academy point. And I do want to let you touch on this, but the last point I want to make here is just thinking about this upcoming season, because the expectations will be win the league, win the FA Cup, win the League Cup, and win the Champions League. And I think it's reasonable to expect us to do that. If we don't, it'll have been a failure, obviously. I kid. But amid those expectations, there's also the expectation to give academy players minutes and find a way to break through for them. Again, with the fickle fan issue. You play academy players in the League Cup. You crash out of the League Cup. Fans say, we need to stop chucking the domestic cups. They're a trophy, for God's sakes. You don't play those kids in that cup. And people say, we need to find a pathway for our academy players. For God's sakes, we're losing them all. I mean, who would want to be a manager, right? So these are the demands that have to be balanced. Obviously, I think Mikel has the character and Edu have the character to more than handle that. But what do you think of that? The pathway for these kids, does it still exist? Is there criticism to be levied at the club in terms of not finding the minutes? How do we ensure, like in Nwaneri, for example, who looks ready to make a leap, get some opportunities to do that without sacrificing any of the lofty expectations we have as a club?
It's extremely difficult. I mean, if you look at City, I mean, you just so rarely see their kids coming through. You see one or two popping up, and that's kind of it. And I think that's where it's going. I think that's where we're going. I think it's head versus heart from a fan standpoint. We need to readjust our expectations. And I think we are, right? We kind of know how it is. Mikel, at the end of the day, it's not his job to worry about the academy. It's just not. That's Edu's job. That's Per's job. It was probably Per twisting Edu's arm to get Nwaneri on when he was 16 to say, let's make a statement. Let's make a statement to our academy, to Nwaneri, but other players coming through, that there's a path here. But it was kind of symbolic because it was never really backed up by anything. These guys didn't go on the summer tours like they used to. So it's all really changed. And, part of it is what you said, which is the focus, the spotlight has moved right down to where it's the 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds. There's all that. If somebody hasn't used up all of your Y Scout minutes, sorry, everybody, so that you can't actually go in there and use it as a research tool, Elliot and Clive. But I remember reading this story on Alex Ferguson talking to, I think it was one of the London journalists, said when he'd run into Ferguson, this would have been around the year 2000 with the Premier League, Alex Ferguson would say, who's good down in London, right? In other words, within the Premier League sides at the start of a season, kind of, who's good? Who should I be looking at? Like, he was just trawling out there because they couldn't have scouts everywhere. They didn't have video. They didn't have the data analytics teams there. Alex Ferguson was asking the journalists in his press room, who do you like? Who have you seen? We haven't been down to London yet. We haven't played the London teams yet this year. Anybody I should be watching? It's weird, right? Chances of Arteta saying to somebody, hey, Mr. Journalist from Manchester, and they all are, who's good in Manchester? Like, just never going to happen. So, like, this understanding of what's out there, the ease at which you have these guys at your fingertips, it's going to be hard to hold on to these guys. And it's all changed, it's all moving, and teams are looking to adjust to the new normal.
Well, I think we can probably leave it there for the academy conversation. But just as a final point, Tim, he says, after having twice said we're going to leave it there, would you go out on a limb for anyone in the academy right now? I mean, would you say that, like Nwaneri, for example, are you willing to say, if we don't find some minutes for him this season, then I'll start to think we have a problem bringing academy talent through? Are you a lot more just sort of patient and sanguine about what's happening with the academy? Is there a need for that player, for example? And none of us know how good any of these players are, but I think it's almost universally believed that this is the standout talent. This is the guy who I think considerably more than Chido Obi Martin, by the way. This is the player who could be the next star from the academy. Is it absolutely essential we find a path through, or are you not willing to go to any concrete claims like that?
No, this very much reminds me of Clive's point from mid-season that we look for problems, and actually we've kind of gone a bit through the looking glass now, because the things that are really bothering us are like academy talent and how much money we're getting for players. And I know I said this to you on Twitter the other day. I feel like some people have gone to a place where they kind of almost feel that's more important than points. I've seen loads of people saying like we should have given Ramsdale more games to boost his value, and it's like, right, and then we might have lost points doing that and not been in the title race and gone out the Champions League earlier or whatever, or like, oh, we should have given Nketiah more minutes to boost his value, and it's like, it's not the manager's job to boost the value, like the sales value of players. Don't get me wrong, that's something we want and we need, but that's not the point of the football club. The point of the football club is to win points and win games. And if you pick up some market inefficiencies along the way, like Man City throw away hundreds of millions of pounds on bad players. Not that often. It's just they buy so expensive that when a Nunez or a Phillips doesn't work, like that, like they don't, that's what we're competing with. So for me, not being able to get like £5 million more for Ramsdale, small change if it means we're getting 89 points. And it's the same with the academy. It's like we've gone through the looking glass and we're looking back for like to create problems that really I don't think belong to clubs at the level that we're at and that we aspire to be. So if we lose the odd 15-year-old striker because we're really, really good and we can't, like, we definitely can't put 15-year-olds in the squad, other than Nwaneri himself, of course, a couple of years ago. But you know what I mean? Like, we're in a position where every single point matters so much, and we still lost the league by 2 of them. So I'm sorry, we can't be sacrificing points, because we might get 2 million more for Nketiah, or because we might lose a talented academy kid. Like I say, if he's really good, and I don't doubt that he could well be, he'll kick the door down himself. And it's not the manager's job to find him minutes or find anyone minutes. It is the player's job to make the manager give them minutes.
I think you said something, and Clive has said it as well, that makes me really have to hold a mirror up to myself, which is not a fun exercise if you look like me. We are so in the weeds of the Arsenal. We are so in love with analyzing the Arsenal. We are so obsessed with our club that we love that we sometimes let the analysis overshadow the whole point, which is win stuff. And what I mean is it's easy to be like, well, here's the list of the sales we've made and the contracts we've handed out. And as you can see, we're just incredibly inefficient in selling. And then you look and you're like, we've had 2 of our best ever Premier League seasons consecutively. We just had the most Premier League wins in our club history. The goal is to win. And yes, we've made mistakes, but along the way, we've turned into one of the best teams in the world. The goal of pure efficiency, 100% success rate, is impossible. And to Tim's point, City don't hit it, Liverpool don't hit it, Real Madrid don't hit it. We're so aware of what's happening in our club. You look at Spurs, they just had to do contract termination, cancellation for Tanguy and Ndombele, right? These things are happening at other clubs too. We just aren't aware of it as much. Calvin Phillips and Matthias Nunez, it's been said a few times at City, these things happen at other clubs. And so that doesn't mean never criticize. Not remotely. Doesn't mean that at all. It means keep the criticism in proportion to what the club is currently achieving. And in my books, the club is operating at its best level of performance we've seen in 20 years. So while I am critical of the contract we handed out to Nketiah or the contract we handed out to Ramsdale, and I think we've missed opportunities to sell and we're not running at 100% efficiency, if you hold up 100% efficiency as the goal, you'll never hit it. So I would say be willing to discuss the areas where we can improve while acknowledging that 100% performance in these areas is not possible. And that overall, the real question is, have we built an excellent squad that can compete on all fronts? And I think we've done that. Now, does it need to be improved? It does, which means we can switch gears and talk about being snubbed by Benjamin freaking Sesko. No, all right. Well, sort of. The rumor, Paul, is that Sesko will stay at Red Bull Leipzig. We have done 27 episodes on Sesko, so I'm not bitter about this at all. No, look, one of the things I love is that the scouting videos that we do and all that gives us a chance to run the rule over players that are out there in the mind of European clubs everywhere. And we've looked at players we've signed, but we've also looked at Darwin Nunez. We've looked at Sesko. We've looked at a number of players we haven't signed. And I think it's been really instructive. And, Mudryk, we looked at some of these players. We've been spot on in our analysis. Some we've gotten wrong. I think the Nunez and Mudryk ones, if you watch those scouting videos, you'll see that we saw some of what we've seen since they've made their moves. Maybe the same with Sesko. And my opinion with Sesko always was, Paul, that the ceiling on this guy is very, very high. But unlike an Erling Haaland, who had already proven himself as one of the greatest players in the world, Sesko's nowhere near that. He had a hot streak at the end of the season. His underlying data behind that showed that there was very little change in his game throughout last season. He is a raw player with bags of potential who needs to develop. Had he come to Arsenal and found himself with 600 or 700 minutes at his age, at his level of development, that could have been very stultifying. I think the best thing for him is to progress at RB and be a starter for a whole season, which he was not this season. He only starting in March, and develop. And maybe RB winds up with a player who's not a 55 million pound player, but an 85 million pound player. And you know what? I think Arsenal will be perfectly happy to sign an 85 million pound striker who's ready-made to contribute, rather than a 55 million pound striker who's not ready to contribute and we don't have the minutes to give him. So this is why being a big club is also about sometimes waiting, paying a little more for exactly what you need than going early and getting someone you can't develop in the way they need to develop. So I'm sanguine about this. I think if he's the player we want, we are at a level now where, unless Madrid come in, right, or really only Madrid, I don't see us as being boxed out of competing for any player. So what do you think of this? Is this catastrophe? Is this the right move? Or I was going to say somewhere in between, but it can only be a great thing or a terrible thing. No nuance, please.
Yeah, I won't be nuanced.
Thank you.
It's probably the right thing maybe for him. As you said, I guess RB Leipzig have sat down with him and said, look, we're going to build around you. You're going to be our striker for at least another season or maybe for one season. And if it goes well, it works well for both of us. Contractually, I don't love it for him because he could get his move now and get have the advantage of a lower fee, which should translate into your wage theft idea of a higher wage salary. Probably for him, he still wants to go with I want to know I'm a starter. I want to be a starter. I want to be a name and make that move. And I'll probably still get those wages and maybe even a little bit more next year than I do this year. For Arsenal, it's not so great, though, because I hear what you're saying. Hey, we could buy him when he's 85 million. But next year, if he's had a great season with RB Leipzig, I don't think it's the same situation where Sesko wants Arsenal more than other clubs. Arsenal's in the best position. Now, maybe some of that was a bit foo-foo, but certainly next time around, it won't be, he's Arsenal's if he's not RB Leipzig's. And as I say, that might have been overstated, but next time around, it's going to be what it's going to be. It'll feel a little bit more Vlahovic, where he went to, or is it Juve? His next move is not to Arsenal, most likely. Not that he actually showed that much interest in us when push came to shove the last time around. And to your point, I think the most interesting thing is there seems to be a type we're looking for. The problem for me, though, is I'm still not ready to move away from, and that was the beauty of Sesko. He wants to be a starter. We probably didn't want him to be a nailed-on starter every game. We quite like Kai Havertz as a striker, having other options. We wanted the Sesko of this year where he would start some of the time, come off the bench some of the time, but that Arteta still had a free hand in terms of the relationships with the player and his role within the squad. That Kai Havertz is your starter at striker if that's what he's thinking, and that was the perfect timing, I think, for us to get a Sesko, to change how we play football at the moment. I don't think I'm ready for it. I feel like this desire to have this big man up front is a slightly different kind of football to how we play and how I like. I kind of think the guys who really want that are the guys who also want a big man in politics, a kind of a popular, like it's just a big man solves all your problems up front. A good but it changes how you play. I mean, I think I don't like City generally, but City with Erling Haaland is not a very appealing style of football for me. I think he's taken down their football in terms of the beauty of the game, if it was ever beautiful there. They always bored me somehow. I think it's the pale blue shirts. I mean, commit to a color, guys. Perhaps it's the money in the background and all the skullduggery, but like, if there was a beauty to their football, Erling Haaland didn't make it more beautiful. I much more enjoy and like, I don't think you can have both. You can't have Sesko, but that thing the thing Kai Havertz give us as a false nine, like you're trading off. So you're going to lose some of that movement. Like, if you love the Kai Havertz thing, that false nining at its best, then you don't have it with Sesko. You have some of it, but you lose some of it. So I'm not ready to let that go yet. I don't think we're at the point where we need to commit to an Erling Haaland because we think we're going to win the Champions League next year. I think we want this year's Sesko, not 2 years Sesko right now. I quite like the way we play, but we do need another option up front. As teams sit deeper and deeper against us, we have to solve that problem more and more. So we definitely need a Sesko 2024 version for next year. We just don't need the Erling Haaland change all your football kind of guy who's not quite as good as Erling Haaland right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to try to improve what we do. I feel very certain that the way to improve us the most is to create more attacking devastation, to create more chances, to create more expected goals from open play. Anytime you add a guy with elite pace, top end dribbling, incredible physical strength, who can hit the ball powerfully with both feet, you're improving. And that's Benjamin Sesko. I just think right now, all of those traits are very raw. And if he can hone them up a little bit, he becomes a very special talent. I urge you, if you're interested in Sesko, to watch the last scouting video we did of him because it includes a bit of a data review. And part of the data review is comparing Haaland at his age, the last 2 ages, to Sesko now. Sesko looks quite good and could develop into something very special. There is literally no comparison between Sesko and Haaland. Haaland at this age was a proven superstar, performing remarkable feats of goal scoring and underlying metrics creating that were literally as good or better than anyone in world football. Sesko is not doing that. That is not me saying Sesko is not good. I think he's quite good. I think the ceiling is high. But comparing those two does no favors to Sesko because that's not where he is yet. And I sort of worry too about these players that come in where people are like, he's the new Haaland, when he isn't the new Haaland yet anyway. And now he's playing 700 minutes and not developing. So, Tim, I think he's got all the kinds of things that Arsenal could benefit from. Dribbling, pace, strength, an absolute cannon off both feet, although a little more one-footed than maybe people suggest. Good in the air, although not as dominant in the air again as people might think at his size. But the raw talents that I would like to see added to our attack are there. I just think they're too raw. So I guess let me ask it to you a slightly different way. This looks like a really difficult striker market. I don't see a striker out there where I'm like, that's the one, go get him. And it feels so weird. I feel like 15 years ago, I could name 10 strikers I'd be desperate for us to get and 20 wingers. And now I'm like, I don't know. Maybe that's because we're just so good that I'm like, the players that I really feel confident would improve us are rare. You have some that I love, like Pedro Neto, but then you have injury issues. Alexander Isak, both injury issues, and I'm not sure you can get him. Osimhen, very expensive, coming off a down season, injury issues. Hard to name anyone. So clearly the attack is the area we can go up a level. Sesko was an interesting and exciting prospect. I don't know who the heck else is out there. Does this feel as weirdly limited right now to you in terms of how we pivot off of this guy, given what's out there in the market?
Yeah, definitely. It does feel like a bit of a sparse striker market, and that obviously creates an unvirtuous circle where strikers are then very expensive, and clubs don't want to let them go, basically. So that makes them even less available. So it does feel a bit like that. Like I'm thinking back to like 1998 when Ian Wright left and we weren't sure Anelka was ready yet, and we went for Patrick Kluivert, and Kluivert was on the market, and it turned out we didn't want to pay him what he wanted. But that, to your point, that felt like a really identifiable, like, oh, Kluivert's at Ajax, he's ready for the big move, let's go and get him. And I think Arsenal actually tried to get Van Nistelrooy that summer as well. Like it just felt like I've highlighted two Dutch strikers there, so maybe it was just in the Netherlands, but it did kind of feel like there were players available. But I think the good position we're in, and we've seen this a few times, is that like where we've got quite a multifunctional team, I think it does enable us to pivot quite well. So we saw this in the transfer market last January, right? When we didn't get Mudryk, we got Trossard, like completely different type of player. But because our attack is so multifunctional, it was fine. It wasn't like we have to have a player exactly like Mykhailo Mudryk, because we went out and got someone really different and he was really, really good and it was fine. Everyone lived happily ever after. So, and it's kind of the same with Havertz as well. Like Jesus had another bad injury season. No problem. We moved Havertz up front, and if anything, we got better. So, having like quite a versatile, multifunctional team does enable you to pivot. And I do imagine, and all of the kind of reporting does seem to be pointing to, well, now Arsenal are going to pivot to a goal scoring wide player instead, which is fine with me. Again, first of all, I think there's a space for that. Essentially, I think we have redundancy in Nketiah and Nelson, and basically we can and should replace either one of them. In an ideal world, would replace both. But to be honest, I've always felt that we're slightly shorter out wide than the centre. Like, I'd like to get better at centre forward, but Havertz, Jesus and Trossard as number 9 options, even absent Nketiah, that looks fine to me. Like, I'm not worried about that. If we can get better than that, great. But when I look out wide, particularly, I think Smith Rowe will go anyway, but he's stopped being considered a wide option. I don't really consider Fabio Vieira a wide option. I think we've got 3 wingers and we need 4. So I think my preference might always have been a wide player anyway, but I'm relatively open-minded about it. But that's the good thing about, like, we're not carrying obvious gaps. It's not like we have to buy a striker because we don't have one. It's, can we get better there? And we're operating really at the margin. So I'm pretty relaxed about it at the moment. I might not be in 2 months' time. And I do think, on one hand, it's fortunate for us that this hasn't dragged out all summer, that this has a resolution now and we can move on now. And that's good. But of course, we're about to come into a tournament, and that's kind of going to create a delay anyway. And this might have been a signing we could have got out of the way before a tournament. So at the moment, it's not a big problem. Might be down the line, but we'll see.
Paul, I want to let you back in here, except to say one thing. I hear a lot of people say, well, it's easy to improve because you just upgrade on Nketiah and the Nketiah minutes go to that other player. And that's an easy way to improve. I have to slightly disagree, only in saying that once Kai became number 9, there were no Nketiah minutes, right? If you look at the Arsenal that we finished the season as, the Arsenal that we think was the dominant Arsenal from January to May, that Arsenal had Kai Havertz at 9, and he played almost every minute of every game in that position. So suddenly there are no Eddie minutes there. The way you get better is you bring someone in who can push Kai out of the number 9 in certain games, or back to the number 8, or a guy who can play left wing instead of Trossard or Martinelli, or who can play right wing for Saka when Saka's not at his absolute thrusting best. Paul, your thoughts?
So generally, I would sign up to Tim's view. Like, that's basically my view. We have different ways of doing it. We can pivot to we do need a winger, right? We do need a threat from the wing to back up your Martinellis and your Sakas. But I actually think this summer we need your Benjamin Sesko of 2024, or an Olivier Giroud of like a few years, a guy who's not peak prime, who's not going to start, but does a specific kind of job, really good with his feet, really good connecting to play. But you know what he is. He's the big guy up front, and you bring him on after 70 minutes against Bournemouth at home because those bastards have 11 guys in the 6-yard box. They're going to be even deeper next year. There's going to be a certain number of games, a certain number of situations, many games worth of situations, a few games where the whole game is that situation, where we need that thing to take advantage of all that possession, all the ball on the wing, all our wingers triple marked, and we can't quite break them down in a way that, we've got to 89 points, but there's a couple more games you can unlock by having that option. And it's not Erling Haaland peak prime. Okay, if you could get him, you take him. But that's not the move we're looking to make. We're looking at Sesko 2024, where he's starting some games, not all of them. A Giroud kind of 32, 33 years old, where he does a very defined role and you bring him in certain situations. I think we need a new tool in the kit bag because they're going to sit deeper again, and we need those extra couple of points from those games. Overall, I agree with Tim, which is there are many ways to beat a team, and we have a way of doing it. We just need more quality up front. But I do think we need our tool bag is missing one tool for this season coming up.
Yeah. Last topic here, just quickly. Erik ten Hag staying at United. I got to be honest. Football has the ability to make you miserable and has the ability to make you feel joy. Arsenal made me feel joy a lot more than misery this season, but Manchester United run a close second for the amount of joy they gave me this season, and I owe Erik ten Hag a lot for that. I mean, you can point to the trophies, and I implore you to do that because it means you will land on the idea that Erik ten Hag should stay, which is fantastic. When you have just produced the worst season in a club's history statistically, when you have finished 95th, this is a true stat. There are 96 teams that competed in top 5 European leagues this season, and United allowed more shots than all but one of them. They finished 95th. Someone in the replies to that said, but we had an injury crisis. And the guy who wrote the stat just went, mate. I mean, I don't care. When you are one of the biggest, richest clubs in the world, an injury crisis shouldn't mean you go from maybe a title contender to one of the worst teams in football. And that's who they were. Their XG difference had them 15th in the Premier League. They finished on a -1 goal difference. They lost 14 Premier League games. And honestly, it should have been more than that. We can all think of the games that they got. I mean, the Wolves game to start the season when they somehow didn't get a penalty against for Onana. Cleaning out, I can't remember who he cleaned out at the time now anymore. But moral of the story is United were dreadful under Ten Hag. There was no clear system. He was at war with his players. Now what do? The guy has shown he has no talent ID, so they're going to take that away from him because that always works really well at a club. And now you can't bring Sancho back. He won't play for him. Marcus Rashford doesn't seem to want to play for him. Bruno Fernandes seems to want to get away from him. United without Bruno Fernandes are probably a relegation candidate. They still have Onana. They still have Antony. They still have Casemiro. Varane is leaving. They've still got someone my height playing center back. They've got the bones of Luke Shaw. They've got a right back in Wan-Bissaka who has roughly the same technical level that I do. The talent isn't good enough. Kobe Mainoo's career is going to go right down the toilet if he's continued to ask to cover 70 yards of green grass while everybody else stands in the defensive third or the attacking third as a system. Tim, I got to be honest. I think this is a litmus test for IQ in football. When you point to him winning the FA Cup as a reason to keep a guy who has produced some of the worst football that club has ever played, both statistically and on the eye test. And I love it. I love it. And I'm thrilled about it. I'm curious if you have any strong thoughts about Erik ten Hag staying, other than the fact that we once again get to hear him say we don't play friendlies when he beats our U17s at SoFi Stadium in LA.
Yeah, I quite liked the analogy you and Paul used a week or two ago when you kind of said, if you get an F in every subject but an A in one, that's not a good academic year.
Yeah, if you get an F in every subject and an A in like woodworking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not one of the core subjects either.
And the thing is as well, using a one-off game against Man City, don't get me wrong, they were really good in the cup final. They deserved to win that game. I thought they were really good beginning to end. But the thing is, you're only guaranteed to play City twice a season, And to be honest, they'll still probably beat you anyway. Like, because as much as United were really good, City were bad as well, and that's probably not going to happen. So basically,
they've been out on the lash till the night before. What do you want them to do?
and actually, City, that's a development point for them. They weren't very good in the big games last year, but that kind of proves the point to United that City weren't, like, you can't model a season on a cup final against Man City. You can't, because that game comes up twice at the most, maybe 3 times. Your season is built on Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, Crystal Palace, and all of that. What did United do against those teams? They were awful. They were rubbish. That's what you really model your season on. That's where you pick up all your points. That's how Manchester City won the title. City's record against the top 5 or 6 wasn't very good, but they beat up everyone else, and that was enough. So like that's like, you want it really, I think you kind of want it the other way around, where you're in a position where you're beating everyone, but maybe you've got that extra little step to take to compete against the other guys. But for me, there are just so many red flags as well. Like the amount of excuses and gaslighting from Ten Hag, where he's basically saying he can't be expected to do anything at all unless absolutely everyone is fit at all times. Which is like, for me, I'd just be like, well, why? What have I got you for? Like, you're supposed to be the manager. You're supposed to add to the talent that we have, and obviously, talent is the most important thing. But it's like, if I had a manager that was just like, we couldn't do anything this year because of one offside decision in September, I'd be like, well, then you're not a very good manager, are you? I compare that to Arsenal at Newcastle, right, at St James's Park. I think we have a legitimate claim that we were a bit robbed in that game because of the goal that was given. Don't get me wrong, in the post-match interview, Arteta kind of gave it both barrels. How many times did he mention it after that? Never. He could have been saying for months after that, this could cost us the league, this could cost us the league. He could have said on the last day, that cost us the league. If that decision isn't given, managers always like, give you a little bit, he could have said, we'd have gone on to won that game, I know it, and we'd have won the league. Never mentioned it once after the day, because he didn't want to create that excuses culture. Whereas you've got Ten Hag like, sorry guys, our entire season has gone to shit because of one offside on September the 4th. Like, that's pathetic. Saying like, but even when, I think last season when they didn't have such a bad injury record, and by the way, maybe you had such a bad injury record because you arranged 50 friendlies and then you said Manchester United don't play friendlies and started kicking the shit out of everyone in all of them. Maybe that's why everyone got injured. Maybe a bit of a reflection is needed there. Maybe there are quite a few people who think maybe there weren't that many injuries and there were quite a lot of players who were happy to wave a sick note around, who all made sure that they were available for the FA Cup final, by the way. They were all, they'd all recovered by then. And so, there's just so little self-reflection from the manager. I kind of think that they probably didn't want to keep him. The Cup final, because they're not sure of themselves and they don't really know what they're doing, the Cup final changed things. And then it looks like they just couldn't get anyone else. And when you've got, these are not, to me, absolutely amazing must-get managers, but Tuchel and Pochettino are better than Ten Hag. They are both better than Ten Hag, and they're there. And if you can't land one of those guys, that says something about you as well, because they're on the market at the moment. So I think it's absolutely shambolic, and I love it. But to be honest, I'm slightly disappointed because I was also kind of curious about Southgate as well.
Don't want to repeat a lot of the things said with Phil on the pod we did, so you can listen to that for more details on this. But I do want to make a couple of points here, by the way. For anyone who says, well, but he won the FA Cup. This is why it's dumb to use cups as the answer for something. He talked about the Garnacho thing all season, right? He came within a finer margin than that of throwing away a 3-goal lead to Coventry City and crashing out of the FA Cup. If a hair on the head of a player is a millimeter further forward, United suffered one of the most humiliating FA Cup defeats in the history of the competition to go along with one of the most humiliating seasons of their entire club history. That's how close he was to that. And using that difference to be the decision between him being a success and not a success is not good process. Oh, by the way, lest you forget, and I promise I will not allow anyone to forget, they were in a Champions League group that was Bayern, Copenhagen, and Galatasaray. They won 1 game, drew 1 game, and lost 4, while conceding 15 goals in that group, by far the most of anybody in that group, finishing on a -3 goal difference to go with their -1 goal difference in the Premier League, which was, oh, by the way, 11 better than expected on underlying metrics. And the reason he's still in the job is because of a Garnacho-esque close call offside that saved him from having the most humiliating FA Cup loss of all time on his resume. That's why he's still in the job. And he's been publicly humiliated as they flirted with every other manager they couldn't get, and has had the decision-making for transfers stripped from him. He has no authority. He is a lame duck manager. The players don't want to play for him. They now have no ability to bring back someone like Jadon Sancho, who, if you could reintroduce a player of that talent, that might be something. You can't do that anymore. I think this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I could not be happier to see it happen. And by the way, this is the funniest part. I'll give this to Tim for a second. Tim, just a guess. Quick guessing game. How much younger than Pep Guardiola do you think Ten Hag is?
I'm going to say... He's been around quite a while, isn't he? I'm going to say 2 years.
2 years younger than Pep? Paul?
1 year.
Trick question. He's a year older than Pep Guardiola. He's 2 years... He's older than Guardiola. He is 2 years younger than Jurgen Klopp, who just retired, or at least stepped away from the game. He is 11 years older than Mikel Arteta. So this idea that he just needs to develop, he's been around. Now, I want to be clear. It's important for me to say this at my growing age. Being 53 years old is not the end of your learning. You can still get better. I'm not there yet, thankfully, but I'm on my way. And you know what? I'm not saying he can't improve, but my point is this idea that if you just stick with managers who are struggling, like Arsenal did with Arteta was in his first job. He was in his 30s. He's 1 year younger than Pep Guardiola, Erik ten Hag. So, Paul, I'll let you have the final comment of the pod. I think this decision is really encouraging because it is evidence that the Ineos era, at least on its surface, looks like it is going to have some of the same shackles around it that the previous Glazer era had at United. I don't see marginal gains in this one, mate.
Yeah. Marginal losses. Am I right?
Am I right?
Yeah, look, I think it was an inconvenient cup for the owners, for Ratcliffe, for Aylesford. I think they won that cup and went shit. And I think, to Tim's point, the difference between Arteta and Erik ten Hag is that Arteta's talking to his team when he talks about results and when he's reflecting on things. Erik ten Hag's talking to the fans so that they'll talk to the owners, and it's worked out for him, right? He's been all about him this year. That's why he keeps going on about Garnacho. It's about excuse making to say, guys, we've been really unlucky. The cup, all of the excuse making, all of the kind of intrigue, PR stuff that Erik ten Hag has been on about. He's a festering wound at this stage, a low simmering festering wound. He's perfectly bad, so bad, but not quite bad enough. He's right where we want him. And what the management at United really need to do is to back this up by giving Erik ten Hag a contract extension, because otherwise he's they're signaling they don't really believe in him. So they need to get behind him, give him a few more years. That was the only thing I really... I'm with Tim. I would have loved to have seen Southgate, and the other reason I would have loved to have seen Southgate is they'd have to give him a nice long contract and back him for a while. Whereas Erik ten Hag, maybe they don't feel they have to back him to the same degree. So they really need to step in there, give him a contract extension, go big on him. But the players are looking out for themselves, the manager's looking out for themselves, and the ownership are looking forward to what they do next. Could be a spicy season.
Let's knock it on the head. Yeah, please.
I was just going to say, can I just add as well, like the reporting is they're going to give him a new contract, but like take recruitment away from him.
And review it every year.
Yeah.
So they're going to extend his contract, but there'll be yearly reviews of it. So that gives him the authority. He has no transfer authority, and he's going to be re-reviewed every year. So he can really walk into that dressing room and say he's the boss. I mean, definitely.
Yeah. And that's what Chelsea did with Pochettino, by the way. They gave him a 2-year contract, and yeah, we all saw that. But like you're saying, like, we really like you and we're going to back you, but we think you're useless at one of the biggest parts of the job, and we're going to take it away from you. I mean, I think they call that a mixed message.
And we think your direction. And here's the dumb thing about saying we're going to submit you to annual reviews. Guys, if a manager fails, they're all submitted to annual reviews. There's no such thing as a manager who's not reviewed at the end of the season. You'd be better off being like, this is a project. It's a multi-year project. He has our blessing, and away we go. Because you're going to review him at the end of the year anyway. You might review him before that if he sucks, which he will. And then you go get Southgate, which I really would be fine with happening as well. Let's leave it there. You're going to get a lot of Euro content, Euro Daily, over on the Football Vision feed. We're going to do one more thing now that I think I'm excited to do. Clive met someone at the Arsenal, a guy named Johnny Moore, a really nice guy, season ticket holder, local London guy, and he and his sister opened a gym called MGM Gym and Sayu Dance Studio, and they're doing Muay Thai and dance fitness center for kids, for adults in the local North London community. Just a brother and sister duo chasing their dreams, starting a business in the North London area. And to be able to just let you know about that, hear from them, hear what they're doing, try to support someone in the local community, trying to do something, really special. I think if we didn't, use our platform to help people like that out, that'd be a shame. So I'm going to give you a quick interview with the brother and sister duo there. That comes up now. You can certainly listen to that and hopefully support what they're doing. So we'll leave it there. Pause it. Twitter, pause one pants, thanks, pause. Okay. Didn't hear it, but take the point. Tim's on Twitter. Still here. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
My name's Elliot with the Glockman Twitter. You're going to stay tuned for that interview. We love you. We'll talk to you after Arsenal 10 Trans 1-0.